Every year, the U.S. spends more than $2 billion on uranium imports, making it by far the largest consumer of U-308. The energy fuel is used to generate 1,888 kilowatt hours of electricity. A vast majority of the U.S. uranium comes from Canada, a nation that shares a border and many values with the U.S. Last year, the U.S. Department of Commerce initiated a Section 232 investigation at the behest of Energy Fuels and Energy, U.S.-based companies concerned that uranium from around the world may be of inferior quality and pose a national security risk. At this year's PDAC conference, we spoke with companies and market watchers to find out what the impact Section 232 may have on the sector.
Section 232 is a proposal that would require on national security issues that 25% of the uranium used by U.S. utilities to make electricity be supplied from domestically mined uranium. So it's going to be, if that passes, if that recommendation comes out, it'll be a big shot in the arm to U.S. producers and developers, ISR uranium. We will see, if this happens, a stronger uranium spot price, but by the same token, we may see a split, a divestiture of domestic price versus a world price.
Okay. The uranium sector does need higher spot prices to encourage exploration and spur on production. But will a quota do this?
The United States is the largest consumer of uranium in the entire world. We consume about 1/3 of the uranium consumed per annum in the world. Currently, we're producing like 1% of our requirements. That should shock people. You know, a superpower like the United States with that kind of imbalance should really shock people. And I also want to say that, you know, even though we have a very close relationship with our allies, and the initiative isn't focused on our allies, even the current pricing is not sufficient to sustain our allies as well.
Craig Perry, president of Canadian-focused junior uranium explorer IsoEnergy, is optimistic the Section 232 announcement will be good for the sector and the U308 spot price.
I think for the US producers it'll have a fairly dramatic impact if those quotas are put in place. I think there's some debate about whether it'll be the decision will be to go with quotas or tariffs, and they'll have very different outcomes. If it is a quota, you know that what that will force. The US is the world's biggest consumer of uranium, 50 million pounds a year, about a quarter of the world's production. That will have an impact in the US of driving up prices for producers there, but globally it's a fairly modest amount of production. It's less than 10% of global production, so it won't have a big impact on the global uranium price. But I think very importantly the key there is that decision, the Department of Commerce needs to hand down their decision to the President come April. And none of the utilities have been contracting or doing any sort of long-term, medium-term contracting in the past year because of that uncertainty driven around that decision and that process. So once that's out of the way, I think come April, May, you'll see contracting happen. Whenever that happens, traditionally, you see quite a bit of heat come into the spot price in uranium trading generally. So that'll be the catalyst for a return to strength and an upward trajectory in the uranium price. So that's a very important time and a very good question. I think it's sort of the second half of this year could be very exciting for uranium explorers, developers and producers.
Nick Carter of Uxc thinks the Section 232 may result in a two-tiered system where U.S. uranium has a higher value.
232 is a big one, to see whether that's going to be a quota situation, a tariff situation. It could end up in a bifurcated market if there's a quota situation where you could have a much higher U.S. price than you would a non-U.S. price, so it could become a bifurcated market. If there's tariffs, obviously, it could be placed on Kazakh uranium, it could be on Canadian uranium, so that's something to watch.
For NextGen Energy, a uranium miner with various projects in Canada's Athabasca Basin, the wait for the Section 232 announcement has loomed heavily on the sector since January.
Yeah, look, the US consume 50 million pounds per annum. I think they're on target this year just to produce 1 million pounds. So going up to 25% of that 50 million pound approximately consumption is going to take some time, and it's also going to take a far higher price than what we've currently got in the spot market, just due to the nature of those deposits in the US. They're lower grade compared to the Athabasca. But look, the US has, in the 70s and 80s, was the world home of uranium mining. But those resources have all been expended, and so you're at the higher end of the cost cycle with respect to US production. And getting up to 25% would take, I think, in excess of 5, more likely closer to 10 years before you're even at that level. So I think is it good for uranium? I think it's potentially good for the US producers, but I think it's still good for Canada and and Australia, for instance, because the US relies on their friendly neighbours in Canada and their friends down in Australia, where I'm from, to really fill that gap between what they consume and what they produce.
Whether the Section 232 will bolster the sector as a whole or just US-based companies still remains to be seen. Regardless, the decision is due sometime this spring. I'm Georgia Williams with the Investing News Network.